That Roger, did you? Oh,
Can I just say, I did actually my MA dissertation on, well, I called it sustainability in the suburbs. And it was about how, you know, I live in a typical Victorian suburb in Bristol that used to have corner shops and, you know, workshops and things interspersed. And gradually over the 20, 30 years I've lived here, they've incrementally turned into residential, residential, residential. And all the kind of policies about sustainability have been just a pipe dream, because the market is what determines what happens, you know, and it's, you know, and also every time anybody suggests any kind of business use, all the neighbours complain about traffic. And so it's actually, you know, quite a difficult challenge.
Yes, so, I mean, we certainly have that challenge, and I think it's about, and hopefully some people might have realized living in this world that traffic isn't the answer, that actually our environment can be much better without too much traffic, provided it's designed and that people can get around. And the developer side always trumps at the moment, unfortunately. I mean, I've put something out there the other day saying, well, all our land, I mean, the house builders, they take options on fields, on land. Why can't local authorities take out options and think about where they want to develop the land and then actually benefit from it and develop it properly? I know that's a totally different land system, but why not? We need radical changes. Anyone else? Roger, do you want to come back in? Oh, I think you're muted. Are you? No? Sorry. I can't actually hear you.
No.
Oh. Okay, shall we go to someone? No. Okay, let's try someone else first, and then hopefully that technical is being kind of sorted out.
Can I offer a thought? Roger has been having problems off and on with his iPad with the microphone cutting out. Over the past few days, and indeed starting last year, the Urban Design Group got involved with a proposed urban extension somewhere in the Midlands, and along with the current style, it has intended to have a main street running straight through it. However, it's been designed as a main road using the design manual for roads and bridges. The landowner is the council, a county council. The planning authority seems to be entirely supportive. So what we have there is they have all the powers to dictate whatever design happens on this site, but it's being effected on the basis of a sort of 1960s approach, a 1960s approach to highway engineering, and not a 21st century approach to compact settlements and well-being. So the issue then, it's about the whole built environment sector, not just people who call themselves urban designers, but highway engineers, and indeed local government politicians being fully bought in. And I was wondering whether people have had similar experiences, and whether we need to think solidly about where this power base lies and how to move it on.
Yep. Okay. Colin, do you want to come back on that?
Robert's touched on a point which I think is an issue that superintends all of the sorts of things we're talking about. For instance, it's governance. And so what happens is you can devise all of the plans, but once you get to the elected members or the councillors, a lot of these ideas get watered down or fall away because they're not supported by people who understand the problem they're more politically oriented. The experience I had in Essex with Barry Shaw was when we did Brentwood. We started up a Renaissance committee, which comprised of all of the members of the key departments in the council, and Alan Cherry led it. So he was known for good design, and was a Countrywide or Countryside Homes central key executive. And so he led it through. So basically we didn't have any arguments from departments or anything. My experience with the council was if you develop a project within the council, usually the departments fight against each other. And so you can never really get control and a chain of command going, because there is no chain of command with each department having its say over its particular influence on any particular project. So I felt that the model, the Renaissance model that worked for Brentwood was really good, because you had an outside person with plenty of expertise and knowledge of how government works. And then you had Barry Shaw supporting him with all the various council departmental members making decisions. So sometimes you get the situation where someone would say, well, oh, it can't be done. Then they'd say, well, why can't it be done? And then they had to answer the questions, because the heads of the departments were on the committee there and then. Now, and Jerry is saying, well, why can't we do this? Whereas normally you get the departments arguing for territory and arguing for influence and authority in things. And something like an agency or a Renaissance, a committee, transcends that kind of stuff. So my feeling is that some of this is a governance issue as well as an urban design issue. And I think you speak to people like Andrew Dakin with the Wealth Development Agency, who would argue for the provenance of that kind of thing. It does work. And then what you can do is you can get a substantial amount of money behind an agency like that. My feeling is it should be an agency that would start off taking a pilot project somewhere to set up an example, and then it would stay in focus and go on from project to project instead of disbanding. Because what we do is we do a project and then all our expertise, negotiating skills, all disbanded because we start all over again in another town.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my argument. It should be a governance authority, which is maybe a Quango or something with a substantial amount of money. You start off with a pilot project and make everyone else envious about what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. I think you're absolutely right. There's a governance issue, and I think there's a leadership issue. And there's something about who is actually responsible and who is kind of pushing the developments that we see. And I think kind of Robert made a really important point that, and I agree with that. I don't think it's just one single body. It is all of us, and also the public. And I think in a way, this crisis might be an opportunity to use some of the lessons that we are learning to get people behind that and support a different vision in terms of, using air quality, using the importance of open spaces, using the locality and having facilities close by and so on. I think there was a kind of interesting comment or number of comments on the chat. And I mean, we are kind of, if we are not talking about kind of broad land use, we are kind of talking about mix of uses. And there were a number of people, one person said that actually in this country, we have no experience or not enough mixed experience of building mixed use. Developers like their individual kind of specialisms, the house builders, the houses, retail developers doing the retail. But we have to learn and develop that experience to do mixed use. And I think another point which I thought was interesting, that actually mixed use might be seen and could be seen, or like moving away from land use, as a relaxation of control by some local authorities, and that could actually lead to more carbon and less person-centric developments. And that can be the case, provided not everybody is on board. And in that case, we need the local planning authorities, the highway engineers, and everybody need to be pushing into the right direction. So I think there's one other point which is a challenge, and that comes from Scott. He is saying, what happens if we go back towards pre-office, pre-high street, pre-shops? And if we are not using zoning, but instead build shells, build spaces, build the buildings, like the Georgian townhouses, for example, and then retrofit the uses into it that we need at that point. So could we imagine that? How could we make that happen?
Yeah, how could we trial something like that? Because I think what happens in the UK a lot is the fact that they change the whole planning system. They don't really trial things so much like they do in other countries. Could we trial that in 5 cities that want it or something like that? How could we actually do that? That's the only really high level idea I could imagine, but what do other people think? How could we do something like that, where we essentially create the warehouse spaces that the urbanists have found in the years before, but we actually create them?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We need to try more and experiment more to make things, the right things happen and test things out.
But how do we test it in a country where we don't necessarily test things so much? Because I could imagine that we just go back to where the big finance is. We want the big offices again. We want cranes. We want, digging on sites, and cars are going to want to be bought because we subsidize cars, and car manufacturers want to build them. We've got to do something different. But we're talking to urban designers who don't necessarily disagree with this strong urban approach to the future. But we have to convince people, and we can't just say we want to change the system when actually there isn't a groundswell of people saying they want that. So we've got to approach it a bit differently, I think.
So do we need to rely more on bring in the small, medium developers? Well, we need to get hold of the land, don't we? To make change.
We need to take a hold of everything, but only in a trial case, in a few trial cases, to show and really kind of win hearts and minds. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job of presenting the end picture we have, but we're not presenting a good picture of how we get there. How can we do that? And it's easier to say we all want this, but then how do you actually do it when it's not going to be something that happens everywhere? And when you just have one demonstration project, or we change a development just so it's tweaked nice enough, but it's not good enough still, I think we're failing of our overall vision in a sense.
Yep, best practice has to become the norm in that sense. Yeah, sorry, I can, Colin, I can't see anyone else putting their hand up. So you're speaking quite a lot, so keep it short.
That's okay, I'm fine.
Talk as well. Colin, keep it short.
Yeah. Okay, then I feel that the urban design needs to partner up with another big group like the house builders. I was over at the LSC last year, and there was Danny Alexander was representing the Asian Bank, and he was doing a talk. And the economist, the chief economist at the LSC was saying that the bank industry was looking for vehicles to invest money. And I think that if you're powered up with another key part of the whole system, you could probably get, say, some bankers, part of the banking industry, to support a particular idea that the urban design community might put up. So, for instance, you would make a proposal and then get the banking industry to support you. And then you do something in conjunction with them and then put forward a pilot project of some sort. But I think you need somebody of influence to give leverage to any ideas that you've got. And I think that unless you've got a Quango or some kind of a quasi-governmental organisation with a heavy-hitting industry behind you, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. I just think that. And when I was over at the LSC, they seemed like they would be receptive to a good idea whereby they could invest money. They're always looking for a large project. And the trouble is there anything we offer them? It's just a highway or a bridge. It's nothing substantial. But I imagine some new urban design project would be something that they could invest in because it involved significant amounts of money.
Okay. Thank you, Colin. Is Roger back on? Is he?
He's got his hand up.
Roger, can you? There is a particular question for you on the chat, which I would like to bring you back in if your microphone is working again. And it is from Carolyn Davis. I don't know if Carol, if you're on the call and want to ask that question. or I can read it out.
Oh, hi, Katja. You can read it out if you like. It's no problem.
No,
Hello. Sorry.
as you're there, you can ask him directly.
Okay, what did I say? I asked Roger a question about the incentives for, Roger, you suggested some characteristics and structures much like joint venture companies. And I just wonder what the incentives would be and also what the implications might be for governance in the public and civic sphere. They would be quite different operations. To take Colin's point about quangos, but I think you're suggesting something a little bit different to that.
Okay. Roger?
Katja, can I just suggest, can Roger hear? Roger, can you hear? You can hear, okay. We can do this through mime.
Oh, the microphone's still not working. Okay, I can't see Roger, so.
Okay, Katja, just what can be useful sometimes is if you leave the Zoom meeting and just come back in, and your tech problems may disappear. Roger, I don't know if you've already tried that.
Okay, I think seems like we need to hold your question. Or maybe Roger needs to type an answer.
That's okay, don't worry.
So I think, I mean, then leading on from, I think the discussion we just had, and I mean, I think it's kind of Scott's and Colin's comments, and is how do we change the majority of the development industry? Is there anything within our power that we can do to really kind of change the minds and hearts of those people? And I don't want to hear from Colin again for a while. Sorry. I could see your hand going up again. Anyone?
Sorry, what was the question?
How can we, because in this country we rely a lot on the big development companies to actually build our environments. So is there a way of changing their approach and making sure they're more aligned possibly with good placemaking, less zoned developments, more mixed use developments, and everything we have been talking about, developing the big parks that Roger mentioned?
I think we have to be quite honest, and I don't understand why planning doesn't do this, and just say the whole system is not fit for purpose. It is not delivering in terms of sustainability, in terms of health, in terms of housing, transport, you name it, quality of life. It needs to be rethought from the top down, which is where it starts, the top.
Well, I mean, a recent, well, it's not that recent, but publication from a think tank, from the conservative think tank, pretty much said it's not working, like you said, but maybe they were actually pushing towards land use again, and, you know, forget everything else and let the developer sector move it forward. But I don't think that's what you're saying.
No. I mean, as you know, we've discussed it long and hard. You know, too much of housing is controlled by too few very large house builders, and that is one of the fundamental problems. But the problems are across the board. Yeah. Every part of it is not good practice. Can you point to anything that's good practice in the public realm? It's hard.
I mean, is there something, and I'm now kind of referring to kind of seeing a chat note from Paul Reynolds, and it has come up in this discussion as well. I mean, one of the elements that this crisis has brought about is that we have an increased sense of community. So, I mean, we've mentioned local authorities, we've mentioned government, we have mentioned developers, but can that renewed sense of community actually be a catalyst to change our environments to a better place and to a fairer place as well? Anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, if I may, I think that what you just said there about this renewed sense of community, it might be a way forward with the aspect of trialing out, situations and selling an idea. Because we people, we are great believers in seeing something happen. That's why the word example exists, I suppose. So the way that placemakers at a point in history thought they needed to be relevant by being only the professionals, and then down the line we realized that working with people was much more efficient and effective. This could be another way, getting the community to agree to a set of rules and principles and selling this to the government. And then when you pull in the community in a placemaking sort of environment and we trial these things out and they work because the people are involved and they're experiencing it, then it might be a way to trigger that transition, so to say, that we're all discussing here. I think this is just a thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the increased sense of community, the increased sense of a local community, your physical, spatial community, rather than the one you might have online, or if you drive to your business park and back again. I think that has a lot of power potentially.
So I think afterwards, telling people to come out and work on a particular project might sell faster than before this situation we're in now. So another positive, so to say.
So is that one way? I mean, there were concerns that we might all go back to normal, but by engaging the community as soon as we can physically, as soon as we are out of this lockdown, is that a way to kind of hopefully hold on to some of the positive lessons that we are all learning and seeing?
Sorry, can I just be devil's advocate and say that there is a sense of larger, especially global community. We're all going through, a large part of the population of the world is going through the same thing. But when you walk on the street, this 2-meter distance, looking at everyone as though they're a potential, disease carrier, I think that there is a sense of community, that's for sure. Everybody's clapping and everything. That I agree with that. But then again, I sometimes have a feeling that when you're walking down the street, you actually feel much more distant to people because they literally physically cross the road, and public spaces that were fine before now feel small, or they feel too narrow, or I think our perception of public space has completely changed in our daily experience. Mm-hmm. So before you would walk down a little alley and you'd be fine. Now you're going, how am I going? What if someone comes? What if, where do I hide? Is there a bush that I can go? I think our whole perception has changed, and yes, there is a sense of community, but also how do we experience it on our daily life has changed entirely. I think if that made any sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think we have all changed the way we see our spaces. I mean, I think especially urban designers sometimes have an absolute love for narrow streets and nooks and crannies and the historic kind of built environment, which is probably the last thing we might want at this point. We want the big boulevards of Paris, potentially, to keep us safe. So do you think there might be a kind of, that thinking might be continuing? Do you think in our design work, we might actually take different approach and seek different design solutions?
I think that not only designers, and I think this is where the big change might come. I think everyone at the moment is feeling that cities are not necessarily fit for purpose, especially dense, like if you're in London or, I happen to be in Winchester, and there's a beautiful, it's the barracks, which, it's very formal, it's big, it's out of scale, and I never loved that place before, but now I feel like if I go there, no one's going to be there, I can let my little boy run around. So suddenly a public space that I never really cared for before has become my go-to place. And I also realized that it's private, so you can't really use it. So I think people are just seeing that their city needs more green space, more parks, more places where children can play safely, and I think this is how change happens. It's not when only designers identify a problem, it's when everyone identifies the problem. And I think that is what leads planning and the market, so the developers. So I think maybe smaller units, the one, the studio apartment that has no balcony, no garden, will actually drop in value, whereas a bigger house now will be more sought after. So then they will have to respond to that. A very capitalist way of thinking, but then, the market's going to lead what happens, I think.
I just want to say something about the density, because I've been reading about Cuomo in New York. He's blamed density now, which is a really easy one because you can blame something. With the density in the States, of course this is going to happen to us. It's inevitable. And what contrasted that was Hong Kong. So they had 1,000 cases and 4 people died. They're way more dense. They're a much more beautiful city from a very personal view. They've got all this outdoor space within a close distance. It's really, it's the size of London with a footprint, a small fraction of it. And I think the conclusion that I'm concerned about is, it's an easy conclusion to say cities are bad, we need wider streets. Right now we need back window to window distances of this. Actually now our streets have to be bigger. We've got wide streets, we just don't give it to pedestrians. We give it to cars. And I think fundamentally, this is going to be a huge argument to overcome, because I can imagine in the UK what they're going to do is, we need more space. Yes, we need wider pavements because they're ridiculously small compared to most countries, but it shouldn't be at the expense of front facade to front facade and giving more space, less dense, less urban vibrancy. And I think that's going to be a huge challenge, because most people are going to think it is the density.
Can I
just I'm echoing.
There's been a response to this notion that density is a factor in the Scientific American, and the author points out that the reason why there's a focus in New York is it's probably the best connected city on the planet. It's just the first to get infected. It's not density per se. There was research in Hong Kong with the first SARS epidemic back in 2000. It looked at the possibility whether air travels across the surface of buildings, flats, offices, whatever. And what happens is that air will enter a window at the low level, and it will flow out at the top of the window. And this is a single aspect room. It will flow out the top of the window. It will then travel across the surface of the building and go into somebody else's window. So they were investigating whether this was possibly a cause of the spread of the SARS-1 virus. And there was no evidence to suggest that this occurs. There was just maybe one incidence of aerosol infection, and this related to what they thought was probably a defective sewerage system within a block of apartments that somehow was generating aerosols or droplets. Quite a horrible thought, really. But the issue there is, it's not just the public realm. If aerosol transmission was an issue, it would affect absolutely everything. And it hasn't been, and it isn't. The second issue is that we're not dealing with this for the first time. If you turn the clock back to the 1800s, this was when the real public health crisis was, and this is when we had the public health movement. 1840, there was a Health of Towns Association, and it's from that era that the minimum requirements on the width of streets originate. And it's written into various bits of legislation. In Scotland, there are the things called the Borough Police Acts. So it's a minimum ratio between the height of building and the width of streets. So it's sort of been there, done that. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. I think, as we're nearing also the end, I think there are a couple of people who had their hands up. I think, Jean, you wanted to say something, yeah. And then there's Lucilla and Steve?
Yeah, mine's going to be a quick one. Just to build up on what on Marco was saying earlier. Yeah, no, I totally agree. To be honest with you, this with this pandemic, I know it's a bit of a. It's not easy, is it? Not many people have experienced it in our time, anyway. So, and things could get, especially for our industries, things could get slightly out of hand, over designing, being over cautious. But I think the thing is, we're heading that way anyway with the mayor's transport strategy. And healthy streets. We're providing more public spaces, improving the air quality. So we're doing really a lot of things to combat viruses such as the COVID-19. So I think we're doing pretty much a lot of things that we could with the economy that we have. And that is improving the public health. And there's another thing you see, if we start implementing wider footways and try to segregate people from another, social distancing, then that could have a negative effect on mental health, for example, depression. So we have to be careful not to overdo it in terms of segregation, because it's not the viruses that only kill. It's mental health, it's lack of exercise, and all of these are factors which we need to consider when we're designing things. So yeah, I mean, we just got to be really careful when we look at something. We'll just look at it from different angles.
Yeah.
And personally, I'd say more parks to improve the health of the society.
Mhm.
I think that would be the major factor in fighting a lot of diseases, including viruses such as corona, as opposed to just giving more space to pedestrians. Another side of that is you provide less traffic, less carriageway width, and inevitably cars end up what they call rat running through narrower streets to avoid major roads, and that itself could be a discouragement for local residents to get out and walk. That could be so. Yeah, it's just that delicate balance, I think, if we could consider when we're designing, and not to get overly excited by what's going on at the moment. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but
I think it's hopefully it's a catalyst for some to bring some good and good changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I think it's what you said there was kind of, Paul Reynolds mentioned it earlier, that we are humans, we are social animals, and we need to retain that opportunity to be social. And I mean, you kind of also mentioned transport, and I know Graham Smith had his hand up for quite a while. Graham, do you want to come in on that?
Only very briefly. It's the old saw of if we actually got rid of Design Bulletin 32 and we went on to the connectedness and permeability of Manual for Streets, then that could, and historically has resulted in a massive lack of need for driving in traditional developments. Obviously, in new developments, it takes a lot longer to get local streets and main streets becoming high streets, becoming locally accessible. But we are preventing that, and we have been preventing it. But the other thing that was sticking in my mind about large developers and how do we move forward on this, it doesn't quite fit, but in Oxfordshire, the university making developments north of Oxford around Begbrook airfield and possibly a halt on the rail line, has actually got billions apparently earmarked by Legal and General, the insurance company, to do the development. In other words, Legal and General are taking a long-term view of the values of a large area of development. And this, I don't know enough about it. Others possibly do, but this might be a way of sidestepping some of the big developer. Thanks.
I'm really conscious of time, and that Lucilla Sampaoli put her hand up earlier and hasn't had a chance yet to ask her question or make her comment.
Yeah, hi, how are you? Yeah, just a short comment, just to shift attention a little bit away from developers. Like, maybe it's not necessary to have developers investing and designing public spaces or parks, because I think we need more, like, to build capacity from the public sector, like delivering good and well-designed public spaces, and also push forward as authorities, like together with community engagement, much more. Having like design review panels has been also a really good way. I think we can even push forward on that and advising developers to really deliver quality developments. And then on just a little comment on how to test and trigger transitions. I think that meanwhile projects are a very good example for people to see and be kind of re-educated on how can change really happen on public spaces.
Thank you. And I think that goes back to points we made earlier as well, doesn't it? About like, what are the quick wins? What do we need to do immediately to make changes? And what can we do immediately? And I think, I mean, we have come to 6:30, and I think I want to kind of really leave you with one question, which is a question that actually Justin Weber, chair of the RTPI Urban Design Network, kind of posted earlier. And that is really the question of what can we do so we are not going back to normal following this. And in a way that gives us what we are like, have 2 more weeks confirmed lockdown. So it gives us 2 weeks, and then we need to start doing something. So you might have seen in the invitation that we are, the UDG is doing similar sessions, but focused on particular themes. So one around more focusing on working and everything that has to do with working. And then another one also about kind of living and everything that has to do, relates more to living. Because there are a lot of other issues and considerations that we didn't touch on about home working and what does that mean to our environment or living and living spaces and so on. And then the final one where we kind of bring everything back together to the kind of, to the planning system really. But I think it would be really good if you all kind of, you know, we have got so much expertise in this space. Think about what we can do as immediate actions and how we can stop those 60% of going back to normal, and how can we affect change so that we can actually take something positive out of this crisis. So I think with that, I say goodbye. Thank you for joining, and we will write up notes. You can save the chat as well, so you got all the interesting ideas within that chat. There's a little box at the bottom where you can save that trail of thoughts, and hope to see you again in the near future, or talk to you again.